Hello, my name is Ian Kirkpatrick, and today we are answering writing questions because there are so many of them. And just to get it off my chest, this morning I saw a conversation happening that was just saying, why is all writing advice bad and wrong? And it's not. That's like saying, why are all suggestions by your doctor wrong? Well, it's all trying different things for different people. Now, no writing advice, almost no writing advice, because I don't like to talk in absolutes, is universal. A lot of it is case by case basis, a lot of it is learning by trial and error, and a lot of it depends on what has stricken your work. Now, there are some things that are less negotiable, like structure or, the technical side of things, which even those you can play with to some extent. You can make up words, you can misspell words on purpose, you can make characters talk in different dictions that are not necessarily correct or the most proper. That's all fine. But there are certain things grammatically that you do want to follow. Which leads us into our first question here, when to capitalize he or she. I've learned recently that he or she doesn't need to be capitalized at the end of dialogue. Example, "You're a wizard, Harry, period," he said. So my question is, if an action follows right after dialogue, is it capitalized? Example, "You're a wizard, Harry, period. He turned from the boy." So the thing in this situation is it depends on whether he said is part of the original sentence or is its own sentence. So in the first example, "You're a wizard, Harry," he said, the dialogue would have a comma, and so he said would be a continuation, a dependent clause with the previous sentence. So since it would be comma, he said, he was not the start of a new sentence, so then it would be lowercase. However, in the second example here, "You're a wizard, Harry, he turned from the boy." He turned from the boy is separate from the dialogue, so it's the start of a new sentence. "You're a wizard, Harry, period," is its own sentence completed. He turned from the boy. Second sentence. I know when I was first learning this, it was confusing to me too. I remember being in a workshop class and seeing somebody switching back and forth between when it was a period and when it was a comma, and I didn't understand exactly the whys of it yet. And I don't really know when I learned that specifically. I actually cannot point to a moment after that workshop where somebody sat me down and said, "This is how it works." I think it was just continually doing the workshops and seeing other people use it. I started noticing the pattern and kind of made a guess. And that's how I got there. Super easy. So always just remember it. When to capitalize he or she after a sentence is he said or she said, or the he, she after the dialogue. Is it part of the dialogue or is it not? If we go with another thing, "Oh my gosh, you're so sad, he laughed." Technically, he laughed is going to be, that's a tricky one, because you might think that he laughed is part of the dialogue. However, nobody can actually laugh, "Oh my gosh, you're so sad." If you're laughing, you're laughing. So, "Oh my gosh, you're so sad, period, capitalized, he laughed." Whereas you might go, "Would you please move the chair," he said, or "Would you please move the chair," he asked. That would be, even though it's got a question mark instead of a comma, it's still one continual sentence where he said or he asked is part of the previous sentence. It's dependent. So then again, it would be lowercase. YA bait and switch. My story follows 5 characters. 4 of them are adults ranging from 30 to 65. One of them is a teenager. The first chapter introduces and focuses on the teenager, but he is not the focal point of the rest of the book. Yikes, that's a problem. I have nothing against the YA genre, but it has been suggested to me that opening on the teenage character reads like YA bait and switch. Should I shift the opening to focus on another character? Would an opening chapter with a teenager character turn you off of a book? Is this a stupid question? I don't think there are any stupid questions in writing because there are just so many variables in writing. It's hard to know. I can see where it would feel like a YA bait and switch. So the general rule, and I'm saying it's a general rule, not in every case because you're always going to find outliers. The general rule in most books is the character that is first introduced is kind of assumed to be the main character unless it is like a mystery or a horror, in which case usually in the first chapter you're introduced to the monster and some bystander who's being killed by whomever or being affected by whomever. In every other case, and generally most other cases, you're going to assume the first character introduced is the central character. And I went through this with my first novel, Dead End Drive, because it has an ensemble cast. It has 12 characters. And I wanted it to be like, you don't know who is going to win, because it's a play. It's kind of satirical with Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None and Clue. So, I wanted this big ensemble cast where you weren't quite sure who was the one. But I also kind of introduced them in the manner in which they would die. But that means that one of the characters, the character that dies first, was the one introduced first. And that gave a lot of people this impression that they thought she was the main character, and they were very turned off when they realized that she died so quickly, that she was not the main character, and they all felt bamboozled. So generally, people are going to put a lot of weight on that first character that you introduce, even if it's not meant to be that way. Again, unless it's a mystery or a horror. I would highly recommend against introducing the teenage character as the first character if you can, but it's really hard to make suggestions like this to know what it looks like. Or the other suggestion is to still write the book from the perspective of, with the central focus on the teenager, because then you can still introduce him first. But ask yourself, why is this character introduced first? Is it to tell the readers something straight up? Is it because it is his story? And answering those kinds of questions will help you understand whether this character is important to introduce first. If the character is introduced first simply to deliver information, kind of like exposition or world building information, it's likely not the best way to start a story. Again, without knowing the genre, that also changes things. So I would need to know the genre to give a better recommendation. But I'm going to take a feeling that this is a sci-fi or fantasy novel. That's just the guess I get from the age range and the number of characters in the cast. So again, if possible, I would introduce the main character first, or who's the more central character first, the most affected character first, even if it's a really, really short introduction. If you look at And Then There Were None, because I actually studied this when it was mentioned to me in my mentorship program. The first character introduced is also the central character who makes it to the end of the book. The first character introduced, spoiler alert, is the character who is behind the whole thing. He's the one that makes it to the end and eventually commits suicide with his note. He's the mastermind behind it all. But because you're being introduced to an ensemble of 12 characters at the very beginning, and it's a mystery, you might not realize it. But once I had my mentor tell me, the main character is usually, or the central character is usually introduced first, I looked at that book and I was like, oh my gosh, even in this book it's like that. So in a lot of books, you pick them up, the central character is introduced at the beginning or as close to the beginning as possible. And I've had agents say the same thing, introduce your central character as soon as possible. Most people will assume the first name mentioned in a manuscript is the name of the main character. And that just happens automatically. One final thing I wanted to say on this is, why is the teenage character introduced first but can't be used as the main character? Is it because you want it to be an adult novel? Because you can have an adult novel that features children or teenagers as the central character with the central conflict. So that's also something to answer for why they are being used at the start. Greetings, fellow writers. I began my solo writing adventure almost 1 year ago. It started off strong. I had a routine I followed every morning, and for several months the creativity poured onto the page with little effort. Part of the excitement was seeing my characters develop and overcome new challenges. I'm a discovery writer, you see. I believe this is to be a strength of mine until I reached the 120K mark. That's usually, I feel like, where discovery writers really suffer, is they just keep going. They keep going, and they don't know where to stop. One morning, I decided that I'd take the day to pause and examine all I had written. I found that my story was a disjointed mess with abandoned plot threads and an ever-growing cast of forgettable stock characters, and was no closer to reaching the climax on page 200 than I was on page 1. I understand that the crappy first draft is an integral part of the discovery writing process, but in my eyes, this was an unsalvageable mess. I had to try again, so I started over with an outline. I'm not an outliner. Regardless, I spent several weeks daydreaming and taking notes, organizing them on over 50 pages. That is a huge outline. Before squeezing them into an outline. Generally speaking, the outline worked for my story. The plot was far more coherent, and the character's development was more streamlined. If an editor saw it, he'd probably agree that it was the right move. However, the outline seemed to be the fatal blow I didn't see coming. After having spent so much time thinking about the story's minutiae, I found that I had no more desire to actually write it. I already told my story twice and had no desire to write it a third time. On multiple occasions, I've tried to write the new draft, but found that every word was a slog. Now, 6 months later, the outline remains the last written document related to my story. I was hoping that time would rekindle that spark, but it appeared I was wrong. This post isn't a request for help, but just a snapshot of one new writer's experience thus far. I have since started working on a different project, but I hope that one day I'll go back to finish what I have started. That can often be the case, specifically with first drafts, is, you spend so much time working on it and learning as you go that you lose the excitement or the passion for it. Some people don't. I can't even call my first novel the first thing that I worked on solo, because it's not. But I have been through it so many times, and I should probably go through it again. But also, work never really stops. Creative work and editing never really stops. It just kind of gets put on pause, or you give up on it because you're like, I can't keep spinning this wheel. I don't do a super huge outline, like 50 pages, and then figure out how to put it together. My recommendation for plotting and outlining is to discover what your main character wants and then what gets in their way. And then in every scene moving forward, this is how I break up my chapters, is determine where they need to go to get closer to that object of what they need to happen. And in every situation, they should have something that gets in the way or stops them from doing that. So in my sci-fi novel that I've been working on, tentatively called Into the Dust, recommendations accepted, name recommendations accepted, names are hard. The girl the main character is a cargo pilot in space. Okay, so she just takes jobs, moves stuff from one place to the other. She's antisocial or asocial, whatever. She just doesn't want to deal with people. She doesn't like people. She's had some bad situations with people. And so she just wants to do her own thing. Her ultimate goal when this novel starts is she wants to make enough money so she can buy her own planet and just populate it with the robots that she's built, because robots are better than people. However, during one of her trips, the inciting incident happens where one of Galaxy's Most Wanted sneaks onto her ship. And somebody saw that Galaxy's Most Wanted snuck onto her ship, and now there are announcements throughout the galaxy that she is an accomplice for this man. So now she can't just get her planet. Now she has to go and clear her name so people will leave her alone. And where do you go to get your name wiped from the Most Wanted scene? Is you kind of have to go find the government or whoever's in charge of that. But she's also with the Most Wanted. So what happens? Maybe she gets arrested. Maybe her ship crashes. Maybe she runs into something else. Why is this guy Most Wanted? He's got some enemies if he's Most Wanted. So all of these things will be standing in her way, can pop up at any time wherever she goes, to then create the plot to move it forward. One of the best things you can do for your story is to think of what your character's desires are right now, everyone in that scene. What do they want? What do they need to accomplish? And have them take actions to make that happen. Because every time they move to make something happen, something else is going to move and either get in their way or get out of the way, but then that's going to open another window of opportunity. And so that's usually how I build my outlines, is they're just bullet points or general ideas of I want to move here or I need to go here. So with that book, her thing, let's look at, if I break it into 3 acts, I also do a 3-act structure to kind of get a generalization of 3 big climaxes that I need to work toward. And they might not be traditionally huge climaxes like place explodes, but it gives me something that's major before a major shift or scenery change or goal change in the novel. And so if in Act 1, her goal at the start of the book is to just do her job, make some money, buy a planet. Inciting incident, this guy gets on her ship and now she's wanted. The climax is going to with her new goal of getting rid of this guy. She's going to make decisions that get her over there, and she's going to make decisions that take her closer to getting rid of this guy. Now, that might mean interacting with the police. Now, what might happen? What's the worst case scenario of what happens if she interacts with the police? She gets arrested. They don't listen to her. So then Act 2, now we've got a shift in the plot. Act 2, she's now in jail. So what do we have to do? She can't go and get her name cleared because she's in jail. New goal, get out of jail. Escape the jail. And so that will fling us to our next major climax of what happens. And then once she gets out of jail, then there's another inciting incident and a new goal. And so that's how I work it. And so then within each of the chapters, I just figure out, I need to do this next. I need to do this next. And that's really how I build my chapters, as I move them from place to place, knowing what they need to ultimately get to, because we can think, I need to go to the grocery store. Okay, what does that mean? What all do I need to do in order to go to the grocery store? I need to take a shower. I need to get dressed. I need to comb my hair. Do I need to wait for my hair to dry, or can I just go? I need to get in the car. Boom. And so I can go through all of these motions. Now, obviously, with a story, we're not going to go through that many mundane things, but you can see how there's a progression. To everything that we're doing. And I have found that structuring my novels or plotting like that, I'm not spending a super amount of time in outline land, which really doesn't work for me. I am a discovery writer, but I like to have a point that I'm working towards, and then I kind of grope around the universe and figure out exactly what all is there while I've got an eye on the focus. So that's really worked for me. Give it a try if it sounds good to you. Should I put realism in a fantasy story? So my story, I'm creating a new mythical universe, and I thought about making some part of it scientific. For example, the main character sometimes uses concepts of science to save themselves, even though the whole story is a fantasy. Is that all right, or does it throw off a reader? I also tried making some mythological places more scientific and then incorporating it into the story. Is it a terrible idea, or will it actually be more fun to read since it's completely new perspective and thought? So you can use science in fantasy. The most important thing for anything, you can do literally anything in your writing, okay? First and foremost, to everybody out there who is writing, you can do anything in your writing. There's one thing that needs to be, jackhammered into our minds, the minds of every artist out there, is believability is more important than realism. So you can use all the science, and that sounds funny because we're saying, can I use realism and fantasy? You can use whatever you want, but make us believe that it can exist in those circumstances. Make us believe in this world you've created. So if this world runs on science, do it. Even fantasy or sci-fi worlds like Star Trek have to have some kind of structure in order, or ruling system, that we don't necessarily have to know all the rules, but we have to see that there's a logic behind what the characters are doing or how stuff works. It's not just, it just exists. It just exists because I say so. As soon as you start taking away the structure is when you start losing readers. But other than that, but as long as you keep something solid like that, but as long as you keep a structure in your world that makes sense in the underline, that we never actually see as the reader, but we can feel it as we read, you're fine. Do whatever. Always remember, believability over realism. Could that happen in real life? Doesn't matter. Is it believable in the story? Yes. And this is so huge. With so many people saying, well, that's not realistic. That's not my experience. I don't care if it was your experience. Is it believable in this context? Because I'm not trying to copy your experience. I'm not trying to represent your experience. If we look at a character who, say, guards a strip club, a bouncer of a strip club, we're going to write it one way to make it believable in the instance. Now, if we've never been a bouncer of a strip club, are we going to know exactly how it works? No. If we have been a bouncer of a strip club, are we going to know exactly how it works? Yes. But if we play it super realistically, is it going to be entertaining? We just, at a writing group that I'm in locally, We just read a play that was basically, not basically, it was just a courtroom scene. The first half was talking to the plaintiff, the complainant, and the second was the defense. The second half was the defense, and they just question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. Now, is it realistic for a courtroom? Yes. The whole thing was, one of the gentlemen in the group actually said this is pretty much like a courtroom. Now, is it entertaining as a play? No. Now, is Legally Blonde's courtroom scene realistic for a courtroom? No. But is it believable in the context of that movie? Yes. We go along with it. We accept it. We be entertained. So that's the moral of this story. Always go for realism. Always go for believability over realism, and you will win your readers over. Same goes for any other kind of art. You don't have to have the most realistic anatomy to draw viewers in or people to love your art, as long as it's believable in the way that it's drawn. So, those are my tips for today. Those are my tips for today. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe. If you've got your own writing questions that you would like answered, please let me know down in the comments below, and I will see you next time. I hope this was helpful for you, and stay safe, my friends. Bye-bye.